Hello friends now, and welcome to the Pirate Round. I be Cap'n Skultopus, and this be the Scarlet Raven. And right now we're having ourselves some very tasty grog, and we're going to do our first Yar Har of the day. Yar Har.
Not that this is our toast.
No. Now, as we do in every episode here of the Pirate Round, we start with a toast to our friends. And we open up the big crystal skull here that's got the Jamaican Mountain Red in it. And we pour a little bit out for our friends here, friends who we wish were here, friends who aren't here, friends who have passed along the way, and friends who we've yet to meet, and good friends all, hopefully. Put that back in there now.
I'm going to do a quick shout out to some of our new followers. River Pirate 13, who we watched a few of your episodes about rum tasting, and we really appreciate you following us. We'll be following you now, and enjoy your rum reviews. And I know you enjoy ours, so Yar Har to you.
Yar Har. Alrighty then. Oh boy, that's smooth. Now, Scottish Raven. There's times, you know, when we're not always plundering and freebooting and scalawagging, and we've got times to do other things.
When do we have time to do other things?
Oh.
That's all we ever did.
Well, I've got time to do a thing called reading.
Now, reading is a good thing to do.
It is.
Now, the captain here reads a large amount. I don't read as much as he does, but he will go through, he will read 3 or 4 books at one time. I don't know how he does it. I can barely read one at one time.
Well, you know, it's a trick I learned from Pyrate. I'll explain later. So, I want to talk about books. As we started out with the Pirate Round, we said we would talk about many things. We would talk about run reviews, movies, books, musics, and things of the sorts like that. And history, of course. And we've had guests here who've done music and talked about their own pirate history.
And hope to have more music in the future.
Things. True. So right now I want to talk about a book that I just finished, and this is a good one. Now this one here is called Villians of All Nations. It's by Dr. Marcus Rediker, who teaches there at the University of Pennsylvania, I think. And he's put together this book. Now, it's very well researched. I found that out when I realized that over a third of it is actually notes, and the book itself is only about 2/3 book, 1/3 notes. And he's got a really interesting idea when he talks about these Atlantic pirates here in the Golden Age. And so, mainly, when he starts out, he talks about these pirates and how at first they had a bit of a free reign working as privateers. Underneath their various crowns. But as the wars stopped, the War of Spanish Succession and the Queen Anne's War and the like, as the wars stopped, the pirates, you know, the privateers, well, they didn't have much else to do. They were pretty much cut out of the merchant service because of their previous wartime experience, and many of them wouldn't actually go back into the merchant service because of how poorly they were treated. And so they decided to become pirates. And the thing is, at the time, the economy of the world was changing. The large ships were becoming a lot like factories themselves, and they were producing slaves and goods and different sorts of trade goods. And they weren't so much the exploration ships or the warships of before. And so the men who worked on them were being treated more and more like nothing but cogs in a wheel. Instantly replaceable, whether they lived or died, it didn't quite matter. And an important concept that he talks about in here is the economics of piracy, and how the pirate captains created their crews on the idea of freedom for all, equality amongst the crews, and a clean shot at an economic freedom and an economic future that isn't tied down to the crown itself or the shipmasters or the governors of colonies or anything like that.
Now, if you remember, we did an episode that was kind of a what if. It wasn't focusing so much on Blackbeard, but it was a little bit about the economy of piracy.
True.
And how pirates could have possibly, it actually originated as a conversation between the captain and I, of how pirates could have been on the take an insurance fraud scam of sorts. So if you look back in some of the previous episodes, you'll find that episode.
Right, we talked about a bit about insurance fraud and this idea that ship captains and pirate captains, merchant captains, etc., were in on it together, so that they would be able to bilk the insurance carriers, yet still walk away with a certain amount of plunder, and everyone would benefit. So he introduces a term in here, in Villians of All Nations, and the term is a Latin term. It's Hostis Humani Generis. And what that means in Latin is enemies of all mankind. And essentially at the time there, the Golden Age of Pyracy, pirates themselves had been declared enemies of all mankind by the governments, especially the English and the French. Now the Spanish had always been hanging pirates throughout all this time. But the English and the French, especially in the Dutch, had begun hanging pirates instead of giving them amnesty and letting them go, or giving them prison sentences, or selling them into slavery, so to speak.
Giving them letters of marque or pardons.
Well, the privateering ages were up because the wars weren't happening anymore. And what do you do with these men? Well, they become enemies of all mankind.
Right, the Treaty of Urbach was one of those.
The Treaty of Utrecht.
Utrecht, that's it.
True.
Utrecht.
So,
what's
happened here is that essentially governments begin declaring it's a fair game in open season on any sort of pirates, and they begin hanging them in large numbers. There at Cape Coast Castle in Africa, at Boston, in London, in Jamaica, in Charleston, and places like that. And because of this, pirates themselves became more violent. And they became more violent essentially towards the ship captains, the ones who they felt had wronged them in their earlier lives as perhaps merchant seamen. And many times they would beat and smack about those ship captains themselves, and sometimes even throw their personal belongings overboard. And even then they would go ahead and burn their ships as a way to get back at them. And we have the famous statement by Bartholomew Roberts. It was not Bartholomew Roberts. Black Sam Bellamy, who when he confronted a ship captain said, "Damn you for a puppy. There's only this difference between you and I, that you rob men under the cover of the law, but then I rob men under the cover of my own courage." And so they sought
That's a great quote.
It is. I'm paraphrasing it.
Which really, holds true to modern times.
It does. And that brings us there to the economics of it, that so many of these pirates were actually honest seamen who at one time decided to turn pirate because they couldn't make any sort of a living as a seaman themselves. And many of them were starving and were so underprivileged that they would take any chance, even if they would hang, even if they would all hang together, they would take any chance in order to have a chance that would live. Well,
let's not mention, what you were talking about earlier about the sailor treatment. Sailors were treated so illy, and sometimes weren't even paid. We hit upon that in one of our previous episodes with Henry Avery, that they were promised to be paid every 6 months, and they weren't paid.
Quite often not.
And that's quite a sham. These sailors not getting their pay, they needing their pay, worked to the bone, and of course there was always scurvy, and the belief that in scurvy that if you were lackadaisical, it was the cause of scurvy.
Yeah, man, quite funny. It's a way to transfer blame down to someone who is, in a sense, unable to defend themselves against such blame. And so, what you have there is that the pirates then thought that the shipmaster was the great enemy, and many of them carried a great deal of animosity toward them, and in some cases lashed out in violence against them. And we have the famous Edward Lowe situation where when a Portuguese captain cut loose a bag of gold coins to fall overside when Ned Lowe and his crew jumped on board his ship. Well, then Ned cut off the captain's lips and ears and boiled them in front of him and forced him to eat his own lips and ears as a way to get back at them and to create a sense of terror amongst all the other pirates, all the other seamen about and ship captains, and perhaps next time they wouldn't resist so much when they were boarded.
There was another story, and I can't remember which pirate it was, where the captain, they threw him overboard, and the mate put up quite a fight, and somebody grabbed a boarding axe as he was holding on to the edge of the ship and trying to fight to stay, and they chopped his hands off and threw him overboard.
That's true. Now that story's actually in here too, and there's great anecdotes in here. But he looks at piracy as a little philosophically, in the sense of it's an economic trade-off between good and evil, and fairness and unfairness, and that piracy is the only reaction that could come about when you have men dispossessed by economics and when they have absolutely no chance at all in breaking out of the class system that they were caught up in.
Well, the English, at the time were cutting back on their sailing too.
True.
So these guys were all out of work, and what do you do when that's all you've known in life?
That's true.
It's not like you're going to go grow plants or something.
Well, it would be very hard because many of these men were impressed aboard the merchant ships anyway, and aboard the English men of war. They were impressed, and they might not have wanted to be there, having left their families and loved ones behind, but they were there, and there was no way to get out of it. It was sort of a slavery. And one sort of anecdote, he says that many men would prefer to be in prison because you don't starve to death in prison now. You've got food to eat, and you could be visited by your families, but the ship is a giant prison where, unfortunately, you can also drown. It's an interesting quote. The book takes place mainly in the Golden Age of Pyracy, which was about 1700 to 1722, 1724. And
actually, I think the official end was 1730 with William Fly.
Okay, I can see that. And William Fly is mentioned in here. And there's quite a few. Some of the lesser-known captains are mentioned, and some lesser-known pirates. He's done quite a bit, quite a job here of research. And I will notice that many authors now who write about piracy quote this book and quote his work that he's done, especially in his other works of naval history that he's done, which I intend to read about here. I'm going to get a few of them and read about them also, and try to spread the word about with everyone here on the Pirate Round, and we'll talk about how good these books are and the like, and we'll see exactly how much of they're worth reading and the sort.
Now he's got one page in here which I was kind of hinting at on the Faceless Mr. book, which is you've got this game called the 6 degrees of so and so. And in the pirate age, there was actually a lot of 6 degrees of who knew who and who worked with who.
True.
So it's quite interesting, and he's actually firmed upon that, and we will hit upon that more in the future. And it'll be quite, I think, interesting episode. But it's going to take a lot of research on our part to get everything kind of tied in with who knew who.
It would. And it's quite a family tree that they've got there. Betwixt all the pirates, how the captains and first mates were all sort of interrelated. Bart Roberts there, and Sam Bellamy there with Blackbeard, and Blackbeard with Hornigold, and
Charles Vane
there,
Calico Jack,
and so all of them sort of tied in, Mary
Reed
and
Kennedy
all the others.
Mary and Anne.
So, one last thing, which I found actually quite charming in this book, is how many of the pirates, when they're being hanged, were asked over and over again to repent of their sins. And many of them would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for what I've done. I want to go to my Maker with a clean conscience." However, quite many pirates stood upon the gallows with the rope around their necks and said, "Damnation to you all. Damnation to all governments and kings and all merchants. I wish I'd been able to do more mischief against ye, for what you've done to me and mine, for what you've done to me and my brothers. For you've treated us nothing like dogs, and you've beaten us and starved us, and I wish I could have done more mischief to you. And I won't repent, and I won't take your Lord, and I won't take your God, and we'll all go hell together. A short life and a merry one." That's our philosophy.
Now, William Fly, as I mentioned, kind of an interesting thing with William is he was up on the hangman's gallows. He noticed that the noose was wrong, and he actually tied his own knot and showed the young person how to do it.
Well, sure.
Because he wanted it to be a quick death instead of a lingering...
slow strangulation.
Right.
So, friends, I would highly recommend this book. It was given to me by the Scarlet Raven for a Christmas. Oh no, for my birthday.
Your birthday? Yes,
I believe it's for my birthday, yes. Yes, look at that. July 2018. How nice. Scar's Raven. I love her so. Given to me, and I've enjoyed this book quite a bit. It's quite a good book. I would recommend you buying it and reading it. The parts, of course, that sort of seem repetitious, work your way through them. It's very worth reading, and it's got a good history and philosophical bent to it that I'm sure most people will find very interesting.
I have yet to read the book, but as soon as I finish up some of my other reading,
Sounds good.
I will jump into that one. I've got a lot of reading to do.
Me too. Well, now, friends, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Pirate Round. I be Cap'n Skultopus, and this be the Scar's Raven. And we're going to say goodbye to you now from our episode here and from our tavern. And we have our friends, of course, and Bernie, Bartholomew Roberts, Bill G, the Bilge Rat. We've got Gunner's Mate Squash and Polly Pirate Parrot. And to all our friends, we say to you, thank you so much for tuning in, and stab that subscribe button with your cutlash.
Spread the word.
Spread the word about the Pirate Round, friends. And remember, you be a pirate. You don't have to take shite from no one. And if someone tries to get under your skin and stuff, grind them down under your heel, because you don't have to take crap from nobody.
Not that we advocate violence, but stand up for yourself.
Stand up for yourself.
And most importantly, always be yourself, and that is
it's true.
To be a pirate.
Yes, always be yourself, always be true to yourself, and always be a pirate, friends. Yar har.
Yar har.